Today, we become legends.
Conquest in SMITE comes in 5 flavours that we all know and perhaps love. Those of course being the 5 roles of Conquest: mid, ADC, jungle, solo and support. Each role has its own nuances, tips and tricks, playstyle, god pool, etc, and so deciding on a hardest role or easiest role is ultimately pretty subjective, and this is just my own opinion. Please don't take offense if I say your favourite role is the easiest one to play. In reality, Conquest is complicated and all 5 roles take a lot to play well. Just in my opinion, some are slightly harder to play than others, but without further ado, let's jump in with number 5. So first up, the easiest role in Conquest in my opinion is solo lane. Yeah, I think my main role is the easiest to play. While there are some advanced strategies that could propel you to the next level in solo, such as proxy farming, lane freezing, invades, tower stalling, proper rotation, sieging, objective zoning, etc., I do still think that solo is overall the easiest role because of its low barrier to entry. Solo laners mostly just stay in their lane and farm for the entire early to mid game, meaning there's a lot less to focus on than other roles and less chances to fall behind because of a misplay. Solo laners in teamfights do have their job cut out for them in a way, with all the tank shred that exists on mages and hunters nowadays. Counter building and being aware of what your opponent can do is more important in solo than any other role, however, which does add some difficulty. While other roles like ADC and mid can often get away with building the same build every game with maybe one item changed. Solo laners do have to think a little bit more about their matchup and what might be best against them, as well as what kind of defenses you need for the team fights when you start those. Solo is also the role where the small things matter the most if you want to be truly great at it, compared to other roles like ADC or mid where you make one big mistake and get blown up. Solo laners often capitalise on several smaller mistakes from their opponent to more gradually gain a lead. So while mastering solo does have a lot of nuance, I think overall it's the easiest role in SMITE to get into due to being quite forgiving, easy to learn at a basic level, and resistant to ganks due to their tankiness and position on the map. However, solo is only slightly easier than my number 4 role in my opinion, which is the ADC. So ADC is, like solo, a side lane, which generally makes the role easier than a more active role that's got to be on many places all over the map. In the early game at least, ADC just stays put and fights their lane opponent. ADC's builds are significantly easier to grasp than solo builds and many others, since they rarely change from a default 6-item build that works every game, and a lot of different hunters build the exact same way. However, ADC does require a bit more mechanical execution in terms of hitting abilities and basic attacks than solo, which is one of the reasons I think the role is ever so slightly harder. Think about it this way: if you miss an ability in solo, you might have missed out on 10% of the enemy's HP bar, but if you miss an ability in ADC, you might miss out on 15 to 20% of their HP and damage, simply because of the damage versus tank playstyle of these two roles. ADCs even have supports helping them out in the early game to reduce the risk of them dying early, which is always a nice bonus when you can be babysat for the first 5 minutes of the game, and it's why I think ADC does deserve to be in these bottom 2 roles for difficulty. Again, it's up for debate on whether solo is easier or ADC is easier, and in my opinion they're pretty much the same, but for the purposes of ranking them all, I chose to put ADC slightly higher than solo. But moving into the number 3 hardest role, in the middle of the rankings and also the middle of the map, that's right, it's the mid lane. So right off the bat, mid is a step up from solo and ADC in terms of difficulty. Positioning and rotations are the main 2 things that stand out for mids, since they're so central on the map and also really close to objectives, key fight areas, etc. This often leads to mid laners having more to think about overall than side laners do, especially in the early to mid game when control of the central part of the map can mean a huge win for the team because of its proximity to everything else on the map, and naturally this means you need better map awareness and overall game knowledge to play mid. While the side lane roles mostly sit there farming with rotations few and far between, a mid laner will clear their wave and immediately have to go do something else to help the team, be that get some more farm, control the middle of the map, look for an objective, group up with your jungler or support. The location of the role alone adds a lot more stress to playing the role, since you can get ganked from both sides, which is hard to ward effectively with just one person. Usually it requires 2 people's wards to properly secure the mid lane. However, it's not all difficult. Mid laners in general have an easy time with builds, since most mids follow the same rough structure with just an item or 2 changed out based on the god or situation. Mid laners also don't have the most difficult job in the world in teamfights. Their abilities are giant AoEs, usually fairly easy to hit, and they're protected by a support. But moving into the second hardest role in SMITE in my opinion, and this one was difficult to choose, but ultimately I went with the jungler. So jungle in SMITE has a lot to think about in terms of the early and mid game. Effective farming routes to make sure you don't fall behind, since you don't just get waves of minions like every other role so far does. Ganks in itself are an acquired skill that you won't be expert at when you first start playing jungle, and knowing where and when to gank gank can separate a garbage jungler that just farms from one that actually makes plays for the team and wins the match. Jungler is also tied to the quote core 3 of Conquest, in which mid jungle and support all sort of interact, roam and take fights together in the early to mid game, which requires a lot more thought and expertise than just sitting in a lane farming minions with the occasional rotation. Junglers, much like our number 1 hardest role, often get blamed for anything and everything that goes wrong in someone's lane, but that meme is somewhat rooted in truth. The jungler has a larger impact on the game and has more complex duties overall than most roles, which is probably why people who don't understand the role and how it works will blame it for everything that goes wrong. But without further ado, the hardest role in Smite in my opinion is the support. So much like ADC and solo, I think the gap between jungler and support is very slim in terms of difficulty. They're both roaming roles that can kind of decide where and when they want to show up, which puts a lot of pressure on them to make the right plays at the right time. Supports, and junglers for that matter, are also often the team members making calls the most, since they're the most active around all parts of the map. A solo laner can't really make calls about a duo lane fight while farming in their lane across the other side of the map, but the support and jungle can and are everywhere on the map, assuming you play them right. The main reason support is rated over jungle for difficulty is teamfights. I think support's job of keeping the backline alive is more difficult than a jungler's job of diving the backline. Supports also don't really have access to their own farm. Even junglers have camps, and of course the other 3 roles get spoon-fed minions every 30 seconds, but supports don't. They have to roam around doing useful things in order to justify their leeching farm. And a support that isn't paying attention to his farm will fall behind insanely quickly compared to lane roles that are usually fine as long as you don't miss too many minion waves. Supports also have generally more counter building, since they need the right kind of defense, the right auras, etc. for the entire enemy team, since they'll be roaming around and interacting with every single enemy on the map at some point, just due to the nature of the role. But that's pretty much it for me on Conquest roles ranked easiest to hardest. Let me know if you agree down in the comments, and I apologise if you're a solo main and I just roasted your very existence. Don't worry, I also main solo, I'm just willing to accept that it's not the hardest role there is, but it's still hella fun. And that's ultimately the takeaway from this. Don't pick a role based on if it's good or bad, hard or easy, just pick one you like based on the playstyle and stick with it. But yeah, that's it from me. Catch you guys in another video later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.